with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. 3 minutes past 8 is the time. Welcome to Cross Question. On the panel tonight, we have with us Keith Prince, Conservative London Assembly member for Havering and Redbridge. Kate Ferguson is Deputy Political Editor at The Sun. Environmental campaigner George Monbiot is here. He's a Guardian columnist and he's got a new book out, Regenesis, Feeding the World Without Devouring the Planet. And Njambi McGrath is here, comedian, political commentator and author. Her book's called Through the Leopard's Gaze. The number to call if you'd like to put a question to them. Lots of different subjects around today, aren't there? 0345 6060 973. I'd quite like a question on that Rwandan story that you just heard in the news there. And also, you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
We've got a brand new panel tonight. I don't think any of you have been on Cross Question, at least not in the studio before, so welcome to you all. Let's go to our first question. It's from Pam in Melton Mowbray. Hello, Pam.
Hello, Iain. I'm a bit nervous,
Hi.
so if you can bear with me.
I'll do my best, Pam.
Yes, it's my 80th birthday on Thursday, and as a special treat, my daughter booked a VIP trip to Maastricht in Holland to a concert. Now, we booked to fly out of Norwich Airport to Amsterdam. It was on the Wednesday at 9:20. The flight was brought back forward to 6:05. This was in March this happened. Our Saturday morning flight was brought back forward to 9:40 Friday night, and today she's had an email to say it's 1 o'clock Friday lunchtime, which is no good to us anyway. In the meantime, she's found out that the Saturday morning flight's been reinstated, so she's requested that we put back on that. But, you know, this is happening so many weeks in advance. How can it be?
It is the case that airlines do reserve the right to change the times, but it seems to be happening so often now. By the way, Pam, I must correct you. It's Norwich International Airport. It's very important that he says sounding like Alan Partridge. George Monbiot, obviously there's a real problem with airlines, with airports throughout the country. It's not just at Heathrow. It seems to be all over the place.
There's a sense that nothing works anymore in this country. I mean, you know, it's like total chaos in healthcare, in education, in social care. I mean, right across the board. The trains. We've had 12 years now of a government, and I'm not blaming the government directly for this, but of just like administrative chaos. And yeah, you know, I'm no fan of the airlines. I think we fly far too much. I think we should fly much less. But if you're going to do it, you should be able to get the service that you pay for. Just like with the trains, you know, you pay for a seat and you find yourself standing all day. Our levels of customer service alongside our levels of basic, decent administration in this country seem to have fallen
What do
through
you
the
put
floor.
that down to? Because you're right. Back in the day, we were all really proud. I mean, whether you think we should fly or not, we were all proud of British Airways. And it's not just them, but there are lots of other sectors of our society that just don't seem to offer the same kind of service as they used to. And I don't think it's because we're old gits.
No, I think it's just massive cost cutting. You know, I mean, there's not a call line in the country now where you, obviously apart from the Iain Dale show, but where you don't get a message saying, due to unprecedented demand. And you say, now, hang on a moment, you've had this message up for 5 years now, and it's still due to unprecedented demand. It can't be unprecedented if it's been there for 5 years. And you know, what it's due to is understaffing, due to the fact that we can't be bothered to employ enough people because we're sticking the money in our shareholders' pockets in the form of dividends. We are not providing a decent service for you. And that now seems to be the basic ethos of business across this country. You look at the water companies, they've taken £72 billion out of the water system and given it to their shareholders since privatisation, and the sewerage system is collapsing and raw sewage is pouring into the rivers as a result. And that is kind of typical of where the country is going.
Boris Johnson, during the Brexit referendum, said he thought that Brexit would mean that wages would go up. We'd have a much higher wage economy. Do you think the chickens are coming home to roost now for the airlines, who've traditionally paid, because of fire and rehire, they're trying to pay their staff a lot less? They say it's the only way that they can survive. But if we're going to have this high wage economy, maybe the government needs to step in some way to help bring it about.
That's a good point, and I think it's only right and proper that people should be paid the right amount of money for the work that they do. I think we've always had a problem where certain industries have underpaid. You've got some parts of the taxi industry, a lot of the service industries don't pay enough, and I think it's only right and proper that people should be paid. The government have the minimum wage, of course, that's how they tackle it with that. In London, we have the London living wage, although I don't think the Mayor does enough to make sure that all the companies sign up to that. But yeah, I mean, the government should set the basic minimum, but at the end of the day, it's about competition, isn't it? And the crisis we've got at the airports at the moment, there's companies like EasyJet have cancelled 200 flights between Monday and Friday. That's enormous. And one of their planes had to divert to Luton because they didn't have enough fuel on board to get to where they were going. Well, that you can't blame the government for that, can you? I mean, people will, I'm sure, but that's not Boris's fault. And I just think, as you were saying earlier, that there have been lots of cutbacks, lots of reduction in staff, and with COVID there was even more reductions in staff, and I think we're just recovering from a massive hit that we've had as a result of COVID.
Njambi.
Yeah, I'm sure COVID had a big impact on the staffing levels and the structures. You know, people discovered a new way of working. People discovered that perhaps maybe they don't want to be out there working all night and all day when they can work from home. But I'm wondering if perhaps maybe something that happened before that maybe to blame, maybe Brexit, you know, companies can no longer go out and get their
We've
staff.
lasted 10 minutes before we blame Brexit.
But it's multifaceted because, you know, companies would hop over to Europe and recruit staff from there.
Yeah,
and
low-paid staff. That's the point, though, isn't it? They've got so used to paying staff low wages, particularly if they've recruited from Eastern Europe, that they don't seem to have worked out that era has gone. So to that extent, you're right, Brexit is to blame to an extent.
I think it's a chicken and egg situation because, you know, if initially they were paying people high wages, why was it necessary for them then to go to Europe to start recruiting people from Europe? There's has always been a need to import people to come and work in the country, and that is something that people are not admitting to. It's unfortunate, the situation with the COVID, and it's really difficult to retrain the people, but it seems like that they just physically cannot get the staff. They were also saying that it's not just a matter of recruitment, it's just a matter as well of security checks. And they were saying it takes about 100 days for the security checks. If that is the case, then I can see many people's summer holidays are going to be in a complete mess because, you know...
Don't say that. I've just booked one.
I'm due to fly out on Thursday.
Because all this is assuming you can get a passport.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Kate, cheer us up.
Well, they are pretty horrific scenes, aren't they? Sort of families camped out on in airports and people not getting their flights. I'm sort of thanking the heavens that I haven't booked a holiday at the moment. Why is it? I think that it's interesting because this seems to be the second school holiday getaway that's been ruined by flight chaos. Mm-hmm. And at some point, I think the companies need to come clean and explain exactly why that's the case. And the government have to figure out if they need to do something to step in and force better behaviour among the companies, whether or not that's sort of fining them if they cancel X number of flights or whatever. But certainly something needs to be done. I don't know if part of this is airports once again gearing up post-COVID. You know, we've had 2 years where summer holidays, Easter holidays have been ruined and we've all learnt to staycate, and maybe now everyone's going away again. Those staff shortages and those sickness absences are starting to really show and make the system fall over. But I mean, something is for sure is that if we have many more of these, I reckon that many more Brits will be staycating. Scotland will be busy again.
But given that it happened at Easter, given that we're now near, tomorrow is the 1st of June, that the excuse that the airlines are giving and say, oh, well, it was because the government didn't give us enough notice in March. Well, you've had 3 months. If you'd thought that you weren't going to be able to cope, why put the flights on in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And you've had these instances where flights have been overbooked. I just don't understand why you would ever do that. And
well, that's imported from America, isn't it? Because they do that as a matter of course there, and people are used to it, and then they get sort of 2 free flights if they if passengers decide that they don't need to go that day.
Yeah, but here we don't do domestic flights in the same way as the Yanks do. We go on holiday on our plane, and if you ruin the holiday, then that's it. That's our week off, and there's nothing we can do about that. I certainly think that the government probably should be a bit tougher in getting some of these airplane bosses around the table and giving them some kind of ultimatum. So far, I think they've written a sternly worded letter.
But what are your readers saying about this?
The readers
must be incandescent.
They're fed up, right? You don't have many weeks off a year, and you're putting money into these holidays. Every day the flight gets delayed, like your caller. Well, can you make that concert? Are you going to make that hotel reservation? These aren't people that can decide as and when to just hop on a flight and go to Dubai or whatever. You know, that trip is booked, it's in the diary, and they want to make it happen.
I mean, Keith, do you agree with George that it is partly about these big companies needing to give their shareholders a dramatic return on their investments, and so therefore they haven't got as much money to invest either in their workforce or their infrastructure?
No, I don't believe that at all. Shareholders get dividends when the company makes profits, and when the company makes a loss, the shareholders lose out. That's what happens in a free market economy. So it's. I don't think that's the thing. I think it's lack of planning. I think it's also the fact that they've had this hit from COVID and they obviously haven't really recovered from it. And I think we need to take a bit of a chill pill in some respects, because you are going to have teething problems when you're trying to re-gear up. I mean, running an airline's a massive operation. I'm not defending
they've never done it before. I mean, it's like that every day. It's like, oh my God, we're running an airline.
I mean, try telling Pam she needs to take a chill pill.
No, I
mean, she's been mucked around. A lot of people are, as Kate said, sleeping in airports. You can't tell people to take a chill pill.
No, I'm not saying. What I'm saying is that in relation to the wider debate that we're having here, I'm not talking about the specifics on the airline. I'm saying about the wider debate about companies having to recover and rebuild from the shock of COVID. That's what I'm talking about. Clearly, I've already said that the government needs to take action with these airlines. So, don't misinterpret what I'm saying.
What does that mean?
Well, I think they should just drag them all in and sit around a table and say, right, guys, you need to clean up your act.
Well, that's not a sanction, is it? It's like your sternly worded letter. I mean, this is a fundamental problem, that there isn't effective regulation. It's like when P&O sacked all its workers, government said, well, something should be done about this, and they didn't actually do anything about it. And when companies see day in, day out, offset, Keith, that the government is not doing anything about it, that their regulation and enforcement has effectively collapsed. And believe me, I work a lot on pollution cases, and there's just none now. It's just gone completely. You can pour filth into the river or onto the land without any sanction at all. Of course, companies are going to cut corners if they can do that. You talk about, shareholders get dividends when you make profits. Yeah, you can make profits by cutting corners.
Right, on that bombshell, we're going to move on to another question in just a few minutes' time. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC. It's 16 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
17 minutes past 8. We have on our panel tonight on Cross Question Keith Prince, Conservative London Assembly member, Kate Ferguson, Deputy Political Editor at The Sun, the environmental campaigner and author George Monbiot, and Njambi McGrath, who is also an author but is also a comedian and political commentator. George, just 45-second elevator pitch for your book.
So it's about feeding the world without devouring the planet, trying to find out how we can produce the food we need without trashing our life support systems. And there's some incredibly exciting and hopeful new ways of doing it. So I write all that up in Regenesis.
And are these new ways of doing it, are they being explored by the authorities?
I don't know about the authorities, but they are being explored by farmers, by companies, by innovative people in food production. Just whole new ways of growing vegetables, whole new ways of growing grain, whole new ways of producing the protein and fat we need without animals, which I think is really exciting.
How is there a new way of producing grain? I speak as a grain farmer.
Oh, right. Well, so perennial grain crops. You know, almost all the grain we comes from annual crops which live and die within 1 year, and you have to create a sort of disaster in order to grow them. You have to plough the land or spray the land to grow them, but in Kansas, there's an organisation which is developing a whole series of perennial grain crops which last from 1 year to the next, and you can just keep harvesting the same plants and get the same yield. And they've already had a massive success with rice. They're getting there with wheat, with sunflowers, with a whole load of other crops. I think it's transformative. It's a revolutionary new approach.
Njambi, we're going to hear about your book in a bit, but not quite now, if that's all right. Let's go to our next caller. It's Jay in St Ives. Jay, hello. What would you like to ask?
Hello, thank you for taking my call. It's my second question so far on the cross question.
Well done.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And as the saying goes, the fish rots from its head, right? Is it time to cut the head?
I can't think who you're referring to there, Jay, but I'm going to guess that it might be Boris Johnson. Njambi.
Well, we can all see it coming. Everybody can see it coming. You know, the guy has tried to hang on to his job, and it seems like he cannot escape Partygate no matter how much he tries. You know, every single day a new story is coming up. The situation keeps changing, and he wants to move on, and people are not moving on. I think Boris's days are numbered.
He has escaped so far, though. What makes you think that his days are actually numbered?
Well, you know, there's not a single day where this drip keeps coming in about Partygate.
But apparently that's all the media's fault.
I don't know how it can be. I think people are, he's underestimating just how raw this is for people. And I think any other time in history, he might have, people might have moved on. But this is a time when people lost their loved ones. People could not say goodbye to their dying relatives. And people feel hurt. People feel hurt that he didn't tell the truth. He didn't come out and say, yes, I did it. I am sorry. That was insensitive. That would have been an easier thing to do. But repeatedly, he said he didn't do it. There was no party. And then it was a surprise birthday. And then the photos, we've seen the photos. And then there's the redefining, is it a party? What is a party? What is the definition of a party? Is it people vomiting and fighting and being sick? What is the definition of a party? It's just there. Drip, 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 drip. Okay. And he wouldn't leave him alone.
Kate Ferguson, your newspaper, The Sun, has been relatively supportive of Boris Johnson over this. Why?
Well, I think that The Sun has been critical, obviously, of Partygate. I think everybody has been, given the level of rule breaking that was there. I think the paper's position has been, well, who would you like to be Prime Minister if it's not Boris? And that is actually a question that Tory MPs are grappling with. So every day I write stories about Partygate, letters going in, is there going to be a leadership contest? And the issue that Tory MPs are grappling with privately isn't do they feel let down. I think they feel universally let down, actually. I think the issue they're grappling with is who else? Who do I trust to be Prime Minister if not him? And if we don't get the letters, I think it's because there's not a natural successor at the moment. So, we're all grappling with that. And I think for my newspaper, certainly we would like to see the big issues tackled. We're incredibly concerned about cost of living.
Bringing back pounds and ounces and grammar schools.
Well,
that sort of thing.
Well, no, the Sun doesn't campaign on bringing back grammar schools. I don't know if the Daily Telegraph's here, but we don't campaign on that. She says, as a proud, comprehensive schoolgirl.
Me too.
Yeah.
Well, not girl.
I will make...
bringing back bubonic plague, aren't they?
I will make the point that our readers currently are feeling the squeeze, potentially more so than Guardian readers, I might argue. And that is what we want the government to deal with. That is our number one pressing concern. And if you look at our post bag at the Sun headquarters, that is what our readers want answers on.
Do they still write letters, or do they send emails?
Emails. I think they do still write letters, although I get some emails. There we go, both. We're in the modern world. We've got a website and everything.
Goodness me. Are you on the Instagram as well?
Oh, wow. I'm more on the Twitter, Iain.
Keith.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, of course, in Redbridge we still have grammar schools. We weren't overtaken by Labour until fairly recently, so they kept them, whereas in Havering, where we did have a period of Labour control, we lost all our grammar schools. But, hey, let's not get into politics.
No, let's talk about
Boris Johnson, yes. Well, I think his middle name's Houdini, isn't it? It's got to be.
You were on the GLA when he was mayor, weren't you?
Yes, I was. No, I wasn't. No, I was an advisor to Stephen Greenhouse.
Right.
Who was.
But you will have observed him quite closely. Do you see any difference now with him being Prime Minister to how he acted when he was mayor?
No. And that's the interesting point. I mean, Boris is Marmite at the end of the day. I mean, I've just gone through an election campaign, so I've knocked on hundreds and hundreds of doors, so I actually do know what people are thinking. And it's really interesting because we thought that this would be the big issue in Havering. And what seemed to be the case is that the Conservative voters who liked Boris, and some of the voters who liked Boris who weren't Conservative still like Boris and still think, well, you know, we've all had a party, we all broke the rules, you know, what's it all
really?
about? Yeah, no, seriously, I'm not pulling you.
I think these people
But no,
are
if you
made
don't
up.
mind, George, I mean, you tend to have a habit of interrupting me and then get upset when I interrupt you. But there are those Conservatives who just didn't like Boris in the first place, and now this is their excuse not to vote for him.
There's quite a lot of them, though, aren't there, now? You look at this Conservative home poll they rank all the cabinet ministers each month, and he's now bottom of that. And this is Conservative Party members.
Yeah, no, I'm not. That's the point I'm making. Those who liked him in the first place still like him, and those who don't...
Do you still like him?
I do, yeah. I mean, I've got a lot of time for the guy, and I won't bore you with stories of my connections with Boris, but
I think we'd be quite interested.
He has been. Well, there will be actually. Another day, another time. Yeah. No, but you know, he's a. The way I explain it is like this, Iain, really. When the people of Britain decided to vote for Boris Johnson, it's like going into the supermarket and going to the shelf and finding a can of baked beans, right? And you go, right, I'm going to buy some baked beans today. They didn't go into the supermarket and buy a tin of caviar. When they elected Boris as...
I don't understand that. But...
Right, well, because baked beans are of a certain type, aren't they? And Boris, we knew exactly what Boris was
give
like.
You flatulence, yeah.
Or being a vegetarian, yeah. I can confirm that. But
you can have that one for your act.
Thank you.
But it said on the label baked beans, and that's what you were buying. And we knew exactly what Boris was like because he was like it when he was Mayor of London. I'm not going to go into all the things, but you know, we know what Boris was like. Didn't say caviar on the label, it said baked beans. Well, the people have elected Boris, and they've opened the can, and what's inside? Baked beans. It was not as if it was a case of they thought Boris was this particular superhuman being who had the highest possible morals of anybody in the world, i.e. caviar. No, he's a can of baked beans, and that's what they got.
I'm going on Newsnight later to talk about Tory leadership. I don't think I'm going to use that particular analogy, George.
Yeah, it's pathetic, isn't it? I mean, everyone now continuing to justify this man who has actually been found to have broken the law that he created while in office, who has laughed in the faces of grieving people across the country, who presided over many thousands of unnecessary deaths, who has treated his term in office like a Bullingdonian orgy, smashing the crockery and smearing food in the waiters' faces. Anyone who still tries to defend him becomes besmirched by the man and all the sleaze and all the filth and the corruption in which he is now wallowing.
But all politics is tribal, isn't it? And you will understand that members of a political party, when their leader is under fire, the wagons start to be circled, and that is what's happening here, isn't it, to an extent?
Well, what disturbs me is that the only consideration is this going to be good for the Conservative Party, keeping him or throwing him out? Is this going to help us win the next election or not? What about the country? While all this is going on, so many massive crises, the cost of living crisis, the crisis of inequality, the environmental crises, there's so many huge issues are not being resolved. And instead, we're all just sucked into this great toddler drama as this gigantic baby in Downing Street clings onto the furniture and refuses to be sent to bed.
I would just... Oh, sorry.
Don't go.
I would just say that I think that those MPs, some of those Tory MPs you've just mentioned, do grapple with that as a moral issue. And that's why you did see some of them come out in Parliament and make that point. And so I just don't think that's fair.
I mean, let me give you an example.
There are a few, but I mean, again and again, the sort of the main discourse I hear amongst Tory MPs is, is he going to drag us down at the next election?
But I mean, that's his politics. That would happen whichever party
it is. But
to be fair.
It's sort of.
But I mean, last time you were on the programme during lockdown, when you were all on the video screen, you had quite a big row with Andrea Leadsom, my producer.
Oh yes, I remember.
Now she was sat in that seat this time last week.
Watch it, George.
It was the day before the Sue Gray report was issued, and I asked her sort of about Boris, and she didn't defend him in the robust way that she would normally do. And I said to her, I detect a bit of a change in your attitude here. And she said, well, it's a dilemma that we're all going through. We've all got to make decisions here. And I said to her at the time, look, you are a bit of a weather vane for the Conservative Party in a way, which I didn't mean as an insult. It meant that I think she's quite reflective of many Conservatives, not just MPs. And of course, she said what she said today. And I think that, given that she's a former cabinet minister, given that I think she supported Boris Johnson after she dropped out last time, I thought her intervention today was incredibly significant.
Yeah, I mean, the wheels are falling off, and there's a lot of people who are going to look very silly as they hold out and continue to try to defend this man.
We do have a separate question on this, which we'll take after the news. Jay, thank you very much for your second question. Don't leave it too long to ask a third. It's 8:30 on LBC. Let's get the latest news headlines with Andy Ivey.
Boris Johnson's ethics advisor has suggested the Prime Minister's Partygate fine may have breached the ministerial code. Mr Johnson has justified his view that it didn't, saying there was no intent to break the law and he's taken full responsibility for everything that took place on his watch. The Labour leader and his deputy have been sent questionnaires by police investigating whether they broke COVID rules at a gathering in Durham in April last year. Sir Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner insist it was within the rules. Bradford has been named the UK City of Culture for 2025. It beat fellow finalists County Durham, Southampton and Wrexham County Borough. LBC weather tonight, showers and chilly where it's clear. Tomorrow, more showers, drier in the west and north, but feeling warmer with a high of 18 degrees.
LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:33, let me reintroduce my panel for those of you who've just tuned in, and don't forget you can watch us on Global Player. Keith Prince is a Conservative member of the London Assembly. Kate Ferguson is Deputy Political Editor at The Sun, and George Monbiot, environmental campaigner, Guardian columnist and author. His new book is Regenesis, Feeding the World Without Devouring the Planet. I think that's the fourth mention in half an hour. Now, you don't get that elsewhere, do you, George?
You're a fine man.
And Njambi McGrath is comedian, political commentator, and she has a new book out called, well, it's slightly new, isn't it? Through the Leopard's Gaze. Now, that is a great title for a book. What's it about?
It's a memoir.
Are you the leopard?
No, actually, I grew up in Kenya, and from where our house was across the road, there was actually across the river, there was a tree, and there's a leopard that lived there. And so this memoir is basically my childhood. When I was 13, my father beat me up and left me to die.
Wow.
So I woke up.
Wasn't expecting that.
I know. I woke up, dazed and disorientated, and walked. I walked all night, risking wild animals and all sorts. And so this is me revisiting how I escaped that night. And this is a trauma that came back to me years after that happened, because I ran away and, I kept running, and mentally I ran away and completely pushed it somewhere so deep.
Right. Both of you have just booked yourselves onto my book club podcast. So, because I want to hear more about both of your books. So, but we'll have to move on to some more questions now. Jane is in Nottingham. This is a text from Jane. She says, how on earth has Lord Geidt not resigned, given his exchange with Boris Johnson over the ministerial code? Now, Lord Geidt, for those of you who've never heard of him, he used to be something big in Buckingham Palace, I think, didn't he? But he's now the Prime Minister's ethics advisor. And he's written a fairly strongly worded letter to Boris Johnson today about the ministerial code, and Boris Johnson has responded. Kate Ferguson, tell us a little bit more about this and how significant this might be.
Yeah, it's an interesting question for me, because before I was here, I was across the road in Parliament writing this story up, and then I dashed to this programme. So there we go, hot off the press. Anyway, so Lord Geidt, in this slightly oddly worded preface to his annual report, has said that he basically wonders, did getting a fixed penalty notice amount to a breach of the ministerial code? He tells Boris he better explain why it doesn't, if he thinks it doesn't. And then he ponders as well whether or not he might resign. He basically threatens to resign unless Boris Johnson comes up with a proper explanation as to why receiving the fine did not amount to a breach of the ministerial code. To bring listeners up to speed, a breach of a ministerial code would usually be a resigning offence or a sackable offence if you're a minister. So it's a pretty big deal that your ethics chief is suggesting that may be the case. Boris, in his reply, has said, gosh, I definitely didn't breach the ministerial code. This is why I haven't breached the ministerial code. I didn't realise you wanted me to explain myself. I will now explain myself, and hopefully that puts it all to bed. So it's like a slightly oddly worded, but reading between the sort of quite polite sentences, you get a sense that it's a pretty blistering report from an ethics chief. You better hurry up and cough up your explanation, or I'm going to walk. It's a pretty damning sort of throwing down of the gauntlet.
Keith, do you think this is going to have an impact on Tory MPs and what they decide to do?
I think it has to, doesn't it, really? At the end of the day, I think it's a very difficult time for MPs. I suspect that most of them are quite happy that Parliament isn't sitting at the moment. And I think we probably will see some interesting activity when they return.
Would you like to expand on that?
I'm not an MP, so I can't speak on behalf of my colleagues. But no, I think we probably will see more letters going in. It's whether or not they hit that magical 54 or not.
Adam Biancoff, the political journalist, has tweeted about Lord Geidt today. So in summary, Boris Johnson's own independent advisor on ministerial standards thinks the Prime Minister may have broken the ministerial code, but has no power to investigate him and won't even advise him to follow it, because if he did, he would have to quit. Totally trustworthy system, says Adam George. George Monbiot.
Well, this is the fundamental problem throughout, that, you set up a public inquiry, you, the government, decide what the terms of the inquiry are, you, the government, appoint the chair of the inquiry, your judge, jury, and lawyer in your own
not
trial.
Executioner.
Exactly, not executioner, because, you're always going to find some way of setting it up so that you exonerate yourself. And so you appoint, frankly, a flunky as your ethics advisor. And, anyone with spine would have walked out ages ago. He's carrying water for Johnson by remaining there.
Njambi.
Yeah, it's a mess. Again, it just seems like there just isn't any transparency for, observers like myself. We're trying to figure out, who, the final backstops with Boris, it seems, and Lord Guy seems like, he doesn't have much power to act upon his findings or even his conclusion. And where do we go from here? It seems like...
See, Lord Guy's predecessor, Alex Aitken, he quit over something very similar. And you think, well, if Lord Guy quit now... Yeah. I mean, to lose one ethics advisor might be accidental, but to lose two, and I think that would have an impact on Tory MPs. Jane, thank you for that question. Let's move on to another text question from Jamie in Harrow. The first flight to Rwanda carrying migrants who cross the English Channel is set to leave in 2 weeks' time on the 14th of June. The government says Rwanda is a safe country, but I'm gay and it wouldn't be for me. How on earth is it civilised to treat desperate people, many of whom have family here already, like this? Njambi, let's come to you on that.
Yeah. I'm basically speechless reading all of this. We know, I think most people will know Rwanda from the genocide. And to then think that, the country is very, very divided. I don't think people realize the history of that country. The divisions are still there. They're still very, very deep. And I don't actually know why or how they decided on Rwanda that should be the place where people should go.
Is that true? I mean, so I went there in 2007, and I have to say that I thought that the Tutsis and the Hutsis, they had actually come together, and the country had regenerated, and it was very surprising to me how they managed to make that happen in such a short period of time.
Yeah, well, the thing is, as you know about this, these things run deep. They have the division between them hasn't only just started in the last 50 years. It's been going on for a very long time. And with the genocide, the generational trauma, that's not something that you can just recover from. Yes, Rwanda has been exemplary. It's very clean and it appears to be functioning, and this is because they have a very high number of women in parliament. Maybe that's attributable to that. But to say that a refugee running away from, Afghanistan, that they can somehow rebuild their lives in Rwanda, a country that is still just trying to come up and find its own way, is shocking. And Britain has always been quite a high ranking when it comes to its treatment of refugees, and to sink this low is, I think, really unfortunate. Look at Australia. Australia is still marred by its treatment of refugees, and it's unfortunate that we feel the need to treat people in this way. There are no legal channels actually for a lot of people to come to the UK, and this is why they go on the boats. A lot of legal channels have actually closed down in places like Africa. Even in Afghanistan, people trying to flee find it very, very difficult to come here officially. The visas are very, very expensive. The procedures is very difficult to actually get visas. I don't know how this is going to deter migrants from coming here. Most of them say either they get here or they die. So even when they get taken to Rwanda, it's not going to stop. They're just going to walk away. They're going to make their way back through, and some of them will die somewhere trying to make their way back here. It is not going to succeed, and all is going to leave a stain on this country's conscience. And I just feel so desperate because, these are Syrian refugees. These are people from Afghanistan. How can we condemn what is happening in Afghanistan and yet treat the people fleeing that in the same way?
George Monbiot, the EU has looked at doing a scheme like this. Denmark is also looking at doing this. Is it really that unprecedented?
Well, whether it's precedented or not, it's performative cruelty.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't do any good it's not like it's even saving money. One estimate suggests it'd be cheaper to put people up in the Ritz than to send them to Rwanda. It's just red meat for the worst instincts of people in this country, where they say, let's beat up some foreigners and that'll make you feel better because, that puts you a little bit higher in the pecking order or something. I mean, I can't look into the minds of Priti Patel or the other ministers who are implementing this. I think it's an absolutely monstrous, disgusting scheme where they're piling trauma upon trauma on top of people who are already massively traumatized from their experiences in Afghanistan, in Syria, in the other countries from which they've been forced to flee. No one wants to flee their country.
And actually, when you look at what they did in Libya, the EU was funding refugees or migrants to stay in Libya. It became horrendous. They were sold on the open market, and we saw those images of, Africans being tied up and being sold for $300 each. It brought back something quite horrendous. How can we be the purveyors of morality when we, undertaking something like this? I think we need to rethink our treatment of the vulnerable, because these are vulnerable people. They say they're economic migrants. I cannot see how somebody is fleeing Syria as an economic migrant.
To put the counter-argument to that, a lot of people listening to this will say, well, yeah, but they're fleeing France. France is a safe country, so why wouldn't they stay in France?
Well, because it's not just about fleeing. It's about a lot of the people who come from countries that speak the same language, because there are so many barriers. As a refugee, when you're running away, you're not just running away from hell. That to leave your home is pretty difficult. Then when you get to a place where you don't speak the language, each one of us, how many British people speak more than one language? Imagine then if you had to go to somewhere like, Libya and start all over when you can't even ask for directions or whatever. Okay. So generally people...
Keith, address the gay issue here, because Jamie, the questioner, says he's gay, but Rwanda would not be safe for him. It surely can't be right to send gay people to a country where homosexuality is illegal.
Well, I'd have to agree with you totally there, Ian. Clearly, that would be the wrong thing to do, wouldn't it?
So then everyone coming across the channel would say, well, I'm gay.
That might be an option. I mean, I think that it's a difficult one, this whole issue, but the big question has to be, although I thought Njambi made a very good point, is, well, why do they have... They've not just turned up in Britain, they've come through a number of other countries, EU countries, which are all safe places for them. But, I think the language thing's an interesting argument. But, no, I mean, it can't be morally right, can it, to send somebody who is gay to a country where it's not legal?
But is it morally right to send anyone to a country that... I mean, whatever I might say about it having recovered from the genocide, and there are lots of positive things about Rwanda, it is seen as a country that has lots of human rights issues. We even take refugees from Rwanda on a human rights basis.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a difficult one, but then again, I think it was done more, really, as a deterrent rather than...
How is it a deterrent? Well, because they can only take 100 people at a time. I mean, if you said to every migrant who's crossing the channel, you will go to Rwanda, I can see that might be a deterrent, but not if it's 1 in 100.
Well, I think it is a deterrent. That's my view of it, and I think that it would perhaps make a number of people think twice before leaving another safe country before coming to Britain. But we have a tremendous record on taking in refugees legally. We've even had the recent policy of taking in Ukrainians and people bringing them into their homes. So I don't think we can really be criticised that much for how we've treated them.
There was no scheme to bring Afghans or Syrians into people's homes, was there?
No, there wasn't.
So why do you think that was?
But I think they are looking, aren't they, at extending potentially the UK scheme to Afghans. Yeah, and I agree. And I mean, there's a reality about... I mean, that was the first time that had ever happened, that Homes for Ukraine scheme. And there's also a reality about the kinds of people coming over. So with Ukrainians, it tends to be smaller family units, the woman and maybe 1 or 2 children. In Afghanistan, it just is a fact that it tends to be big families. So there's a thing about how many spare rooms do you have, but they are obviously looking at that. And I think quite rightly so, obviously, if you have that scheme in place. then why wouldn't you roll it out to other groups? I think the thing with this debate is that it's almost like it's very hard to find the good solution, the perfect solution. It is true that we have high numbers of illegal crossings. They are growing in number. The government has been elected on a pledge to bring that number down, basically bring back control of some of our borders. And then also I think that you have to look at the confidence of your public in your immigration system and your asylum system. You've got to maintain public confidence in it if you want to bring over people through these legal routes. And I think that's what the government's grappling with. And if I'm honest, I think that's what every government would have to grapple with. And there aren't any easy solutions to that.
I find this quite hard to hear from a Sun journalist, because throughout this time the Sun has just been whipping up hatred against asylum seekers. It's been making it impossible almost to pursue a rational policy for bringing in refugees. And now you say, well, you've got to bring the public with you. Your paper has made it almost impossible to bring the public round to a humane and decent treatment of refugees.
Do you want to come back on that?
But I don't think that's fair enough. I think we've always drawn fair at all. I think we've always drawn a distinction between safe, fair, and legal routes and illegal routes of the paper. And if you just look at our coverage of Afghanistan, of Ukraine, I think you'd find very different.
Okay, let's move on. It's 8:49.
LBC, Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Liverpool Football Club have reacted with fury after the French government's latest attempt to blame their supporters for the chaos that erupted at Saturday's Champions League final. Ted Morris was at the match. He chairs the Liverpool Disabled Supporters Association.
Start to finish, it was horrendous. We just seen youths just pickpocketing without police doing anything.
What did you suffer after the game then?
When we actually got to the station and we thought we were safe, that's where we seen the police. They then started tear gas and pepper spraying Liverpool supporters. It was like a scene out of a war zone.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 8:52 on LBC. Keith Prince, Kate Ferguson, George Monbiot and Njambi McGrath with me answering your questions. James in Hitchin is our next caller. Hi, James.
Good evening. The Labour Party seem to be in disagreement about whether women can have penises or not. Can the panel help them out with this?
This is always a question that I sort of dread in a way, because it usually ends up in a rather unseemly row. If an interviewer asks a politician about it, it's a kind of gotcha question. So we're going to have a gentle debate about it, I hope. Kate Ferguson, let's start with you. I know you'll want to be the first one to answer it.
Thanks, yeah, cheers in.
Sorry.
Thanks. Well, I'm going to say two things. I'm going to say when a boy is born, he has a penis, and when a girl is born, she doesn't. And I'm going to say, I hope that when we talk about the trans debate and we try and work out how to best accommodate what people are going through in a sympathetic and understanding way, that we don't just rely on these gotcha questions and we have a real discussion about what people's needs are, how to accommodate them without encroaching on or trampling over other people's needs, and how we can all be sympathetic and empathetic to each other. Now, that may sound like a cop-out, but I don't mean it to at all. That's genuinely how I would approach this discussion.
Because Stella Creasy had the headlines this week when she said that a woman can be born with a penis. And it is true that does happen. And then Annalise Dodds contradicted her. And again, the Labour Party seems to have got itself into this debate yet again. And it is true that men can be born without a penis and with a vagina. That is just a simple scientific fact. Now, it's a very, very small percentage of births where that happens. And it is, and I hope I'm not using the wrong expression here, a quirk of nature. But it can happen. And yet this whole debate is now almost sullied by two extremes, isn't it, George?
Yeah, and actually I'm totally with Kate here. I think there's been too little love. There's been too little empathy. People who should be in solidarity with each other have been shouting at each other. In answer to the question, I'm just happy to accept anyone's self-description. I'm not going to go around checking. It's like, that's fine. I like the notion of fluidity in all things, and not just on gender issues. I think we come from a society that was very rigid, in which all sorts of barriers are being broken down, and in general, I think that's good.
Njambi.
Yeah, I think it's so unfortunate when people decide that they're going to dictate to others what they are. Why do you need to go and discuss somebody's genitalia? I think it's a very unhelpful debate, and it's basically these people are very marginalized. Already they've had a battle, and I personally have seen a child go through this battle, and starting from a very young age. And just for everybody to just politicize the whole issue, I think it's very unfortunate. We have to have sympathy. And what is wrong with somebody, if somebody says, call me sir, call me madam, call me whatever, we're happy to accept that. But we are not happy to listen to their pronouns. If anybody says, this is how I want to be referred to, you're not going to change their name. We don't do that in a civilized society. So why is it that we have decided that this particular section of people need to be discussed on public debate?
Do you think that the media has been a malign influence here, or some parts of the media have, where, for example, you cannot buy a copy of the Times without there being a trans story in it? Now, the way it's written up is, shall we say, you don't have to read between the lines too much. And I'm thinking, what is the agenda here? Yeah. Why does the supposed newspaper of record, why are they obsessed by this issue?
They're feeding the frenzy. And it's unfortunate because at the end of this, we have real people who are hurting. If you look at the number of suicide rates amongst people who are transgender is extremely high. And this is the one thing that they don't need. They don't need people who haven't had, to battle who they are, because it's a battle of who they are, and by the time they actually come out, it has been a very, very difficult battle for them. It's not for us to tell them, it's for us to listen and sympathize and reach out for them, whoever they are. How can we call ourselves a liberal society whilst we're so illiberal and we're not even awarding people that sympathy? It's not our job to be telling people who they can be or who they can't be. People say, how about gender neutral toilets? Most households have one or two two toilets that is used by everybody. Yes, it may cause fights between,
that's slightly different, though.
I know.
Could I just add something to what Njambi said in response to your question? Why is the Times and the Telegraph, obsessed by these issues? The purpose, and I think the sole purpose of all culture wars, is to distract people from the impacts of inequality.
Yeah.
It's a great distraction. People are really suffering, and you say, look over there, that's a real...
Well, you think a newspaper editor actually says to the journalist, right, I want you to write a trans story a day to distract from what's going on in the country.
Well, it is amazing how these culture wars stories, just having come from nowhere, suddenly just dominate the opinion pages of both those newspapers and have continued to do so month after month. Now, I don't know what instruction people receive, or whether it's something you just absorb from the atmosphere of the newsroom, whatever it might be. But it's obviously, you get rewarded for banging on and on endlessly these ridiculous culture war stories while the country is in crisis.
Is that how newspapers operate?
No.
I don't remember seeing many of these kind of stories in The Sun, for example.
No, it's a slightly Althazarian view of how newspapers operate, distract from...
Maybe it's just the Guardian,
distract from the
George.
economic base with the cultural argument. Yeah. No, that's not how it works. And, this discussion, are there things that do need to be discussed? Yes, you probably do need to have a public debate about... Hang on, let me finish. But you probably do need to have a public debate about what medical intervention you use on children, at what age, what is appropriate. Now, that is a tricky debate. That is not a debate you can get in a pithy 2-minute video clip, but that is a fair public and debate that you actually need to have. And if you run scared of it on either side, then you're doing a disservice.
Keith, we're slightly running out of time. You'll be probably pleased to hear on this question, but just give us a quick reaction.
Well, I think, does it matter whether you're born with a penis or with a vagina? I don't think it does. It's up to the individual. I actually had somebody in my team who was transitioning, and didn't make an ounce of difference to how that person performed. My only question on that is when, say, someone is born a man and they're not performing so well in athletics, and then they transition and then they self-declare themselves as being a woman so they can take part in women's sports. But and I don't mean to sort of marginalise it, but really people should be whatever they want to be. What's the issue? I don't get it.
Okay. Final fun text for the end of the programme from Colin in Coventry. Binley Mega Chippy in Coventry has become the perfect British meme, inspiring numerous videos, songs and parody accounts across TikTok and also Twitter. No one is quite sure why. What do you order at the Chippy? I have to say I've never heard of this meme, but Keith, go first.
I order chips and a gherkin because I'm a vegetarian, so I can't eat fish or meat.
I went to the Chippy last weekend. I ordered chips and mushy peas, obviously.
Ooh,
obviously, delicious.
Njambi, raise the level a little bit.
Yeah, we go to the Chippy every Friday. My husband is English, and we gotta do the Chippy thing every Friday. Fish, chips,
you sound
and mushy
really
cheese.
keen.
Oh, I love it.
George.
On this issue and this issue only, I'm entirely at one with Keith.
What a lovely way to end the programme. Thank you so much to everyone for taking part. Keith Prince, Kate Ferguson, George Monbiot and Njambi McGrath. In the next hour, we are going to talk about tattoos. I hate tattoos. I don't have any. I would never consider getting one. Does any of our panel have a tattoo?
I have one internally because...
internally?
Yes, they had to remove a polyp from inside me, so they tattooed me.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, gosh.
Well, I think they are horrendous, and Virgin Atlantic are now going to allow their flight attendants to display their tattoos. I can't think of anything more hideous to look at on a plane. Can you? 0345 6060 973. It's 9:02.
On your radio, on Global Player, and...
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, calls from Tory MPs for Boris Johnson to resign continue to mount in the wake of Sue Gray's report on lockdown parties in Downing Street. Former Cabinet Minister Dame Andrea Leadsom is the latest senior figure to publicly criticise him. The Prime Minister's ethics advisor has also asked Mr Johnson to explain why Partygate